Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to today's Friday Reflections on this, the 9th of May, 2025. And today I plan to continue reading into this book, A Muslim Mystic Community in Britain, meaning in the West and for the West. And I'm reading the section where the author, Professor Tayfun Atay, discusses his experiences with Maulana Shaykh Nazim's community in London in the 1990s. So I'm going to start on page 105, Becoming Friends. In any case, the impact of the incident made me keep a low profile within the community for a couple of weeks. Now, he's referring to the incident when he first met Shaykh Nazim and had a conversation with him. And Shaykh Nazim initially criticized him for studying Islam in the West and saying, well, why didn't you study this in, Al-Azhar or in somewhere in Turkey or somewhere like that? But then afterwards, when he heard the full sort of idea of what Typhoon wanted to study, then he allowed him to continue his studies and asked the community, the whole of his community, to support Professor Typhoon. So this is the outburst that he was referring to. So he said, in any case, the impact of the incident made me keep a low profile within the community for a couple of weeks. The murids, who were my friends, explained that the Sheikh's outburst was not really targeted at me personally, but at the irreligious Turkish state, which had been responsible for my ignorance uh, in choosing to learn about Islam and to solve Sufism in the West. They also emphasized that the Sheikh had wanted to draw my attention to Jewish traps in the university. Rifat, one of the closest to me, assessed the Sheikh's words as follows. If he said those bitter words to you, it is because he knew that you can stand them. He told you very hard, but also important things. But he never says to such things, but he never says such things to them, the Marids, because he knows that they cannot stand those words. Therefore, as he talked to you, no matter whether his words were harsh or not, you should be happy. A couple of things I wanted to address here before I go any further. The point, there was a criticism previously last week where the Sheikh mentioned about, learning Islam from Jews in the West and mentioned here about Jewish traps. This is unfortunate, but it is, I'll be honest about it, it is true. There are some wariness and suspicions within certain communities about Judaism and Jews. And Maulana Sheikh Nazim, he even had, Jewish friends, Jewish followers. So he was not anti-Semitic, but nonetheless, this is there even within our Sufi community. And it's something that we need to be aware of and make sure that we don't let that become anti-Semitism and become something which becomes a problem. And it does in some communities. The other thing I want to highlight here is these particular words that Rifat, one of the closest murids to Typhon, mentioned is actually quite interesting. He said, if he, the Sheikh, said those bitter words to you, it is because he knew that you can stand them. He knew that you take them. He told you very hard but also important things, but he never says such things to them, indicating the murids, because he knows that they cannot stand, they won't be able to tolerate it. Therefore, as he talked to you, no matter whether his words were harsh or not, you should be happy. This is a very important point because it's highlighting the fact that Maulana Sheikh Nazim, even though he was speaking strongly to Professor Typhoon when he came with his initial idea, proposal to study Sheikh Nazim's community in London, he was giving him respect by talking frankly to him. And among the Murids, there are those murids, those students of the Sheikh, who are really adept, really understand things more deeply. And the Sheikh does teach them more things and sometimes, can be quite frank with them as well. But the Sheikh also knows that there are many people who are just there for barakah and for spiritual support, who would not be able to take those views or criticisms, or strong teachings. So there's a difference in what is given to the different students. And if you think about it, this makes sense. I mean, do you give the same kind of teaching that you would give to university students to someone in primary school or even to someone in high school? Of course you wouldn't. But you would give it to those that can take it. And even amongst adults, there are those adults that can understand certain things, that are ready for certain teachings, and those adults that are not. So the sheikhs are discerning and they try to teach the student according to the student's ability to understand. And they aim the lesson at the level of the student. Maulana Sheikh Hisham Kabani, he mentioned previously when people were asking him to teach more, and he said, "Well, I would go into more depth, but how many of you bring pen and paper?" Meaning those murids that normally visited him, they were not bringing pens and paper, so he had to keep things basic because they were not ready for the deeper teachings. If they'd come prepared with pens and paper, Sheikh Hisham would have gone into more detail. And if anybody questions that Sheikh Hisham could have done that, you only have to look at his books, which are extremely scholarly and in-depth. So, returning to this book, Tayfun continues and says, gradually, I rebuilt my self-confidence and started to follow the Sheikh closely everywhere he went. This was the period of Ramadan, and everything was scheduled according to the requirements of this holy month, such as fasting, some extra prayers, and a life in low tempo. One thing, however, was certain. The Sheikh now knew me very well. At one of the fast-breaking iftar invitations where I was present, he called me for the first time by name and asked me how I was. A middle-aged Turkish murid said to me later, the Sheikh called you by your name. This means that you have been recorded in his book. From now on, you have no worries in this world. A new step in my relation, I mean, this basically means that the Sheikh had really, registered him and was getting to know him and maybe praying for him as well, which is why one of the murids said, this is a great blessing for you. A new step in my relation with the Sheikh was taken with my interview of him after the feast of Ramadan, which is celebrated at the end of Ramadan, i.e. Eid al-Fitr. One day after he had completed his address, Sotbet, following the new prayer in the Durgah in St. Anne's Road, the Sheikh was answering Murid's questions. He suddenly turned towards me in his face, expressing how things were going. As a sort of response, I told him that I had prepared my questions as he had asked and was ready to ask them at an appropriate time. He welcomed the idea graciously and said his talk with me would be a kind of sohbet in Turkish, and therefore his Turkish murids should be there to listen to his talk. He called a Turkish murid from the audience and asked him to make the necessary arrangements for the talk at his residence in St. Anne's Road, the Durgah, the same night. It was so quick, but I had for a long time been ready and was well prepared. So I mean, this is interesting after initially questioning Professor Tayfun's motives and what he was planning to achieve by his study. But then afterwards, Maulana Shaykh Nazim worked with Professor Tayfun and arranged a proper time for him to be able to interview the Sheikh properly. I had designed my questions to the Sheikh with certain objectives. First of all, I aimed to get information about his family, educational, and religious background. And therefore, asked how he had become involved in Sufism, whether there had been any influence from his parents, what were the main aspects of his life and training as a Sufi adept in Damascus, how he had started to travel around the world, what had been his initial objectives. Secondly, I wanted to clarify his Islamic and Sufi position by asking about his method of teaching Islam, the basic concepts of Sufism, such as murid, murshid, the difference between alim, Islamic scholar, and sheikh, the place and importance of the Naqshbandi order vis-a-vis the other orders. Thirdly, I introduced questions that the murids requested me to ask, such as when and how the Mahdi would appear. Above all, however, I wanted to demonstrate both to the Sheikh and the community members that I was sincere and harmless person who had no other aim than learning about tasawwuf and tariqah. By this, I hope to eradicate any suspicions about my presence among them. The interview was completed with apparent success. The Sheikh seemed to be satisfied with the content and length of the questions and the style I used to present them. The Murids later expressed their appreciation. For the first time in my fieldwork period, I felt relieved and fully confident. Journey with the Sheikh. The third and final step in my relationship with the Sheikh was his invitation to join him in his trip to other cities in Britain. Most of the Murids compete to join the Sheikh in this trip, which he makes every year to please the Murids living in other parts of Britain. But only some of them succeed in gaining his permission. This year was no exception. As a reaction to the Murids as a reaction to the Murids pressing to go with him, the Sheikh asked them not to follow him, since the places where he was going to were not adequate to accommodate so many people. Despite this warning, many Murids still insisted on asking him whether or not they could join him. It was a frustrating period for the Sheikh, and I must say this is something which sometimes Murids do not consider when it comes to Sheikhs. And I mean, Professor Tayfun, because he's not a Murid and he's speaking quite frankly about these things and about his observation, he highlights something that I've observed as well. I mean, we welcome our sheikhs to our communities. And of course, all of us, anybody who's a murid of a sheikh, or even if you're not a murid of that sheikh, but you love the sheikh, you want to spend time with the sheikh to get blessings. But we also have to consider the sheikh. He's still a human being. No matter how blessed the sheikh may be, he's still a human being. He has human needs. And also uh, the spaces where the sheikh goes and how many people those spaces can accommodate. I've seen, I've visited sheikhs before in people's houses, such as I remember when Sheikh Hisham visited Birmingham, and there would be so many people crammed there, and the whole street would be full of people. And we have to consider, how that impacts upon the family, upon their neighbors, upon the sheikh. We should consider these things and arrange things in the best possible way. I mean, this at the end of the day, it is a matter of adab. Um, and it's interesting that Typhon highlighted that here. Seeing all these disturbances related to the Sheikh's journey, I did not think to ask myself whether or not I could join it, let alone making any such request. After these distressing experiences of the past, I did not consider myself in a position to do so. After all, my fieldwork was mainly covering London. Hence, I had prepared myself for a week's break, which I desperately needed after such a hard period of research. But the unexpected happened. After having led the afternoon prayer and some minutes before leaving, the Sheikh suddenly called my name, looked around, and after finding me, said, "You come with us." Get in his, pointing to the Turkish Cypriot Murid's car, "You should come for your study." I was shocked again, but with completely different feelings from my first unfortunate dialogue with him. I only had a short time to telephone my wife and tell her what had happened. I popped in the car and started my journey with the Sheikh and the lucky Marids to the northern parts of Britain. However, due to my wife's illness, I had to cut my journey in the middle and with the Sheikh's permission, returned to London. As a result, I was able to join the group in 3 places and for 4 days. We first went to Leicester. The Sheikh stayed in the house of a Pakistani businessman who was apparently his murid. The others either slept in Muslim community hall or in a mosque, or, as we did, spent the night chatting in the car, parked in the front of the house where the Sheikh was staying, and joining him for morning prayer in the house. Throughout the journey, I had a very good opportunity to improve my friendship with the murids, particularly those in the same car as me. These were a Turkish Cypriot in his 40s and a German couple, of which the husband, being a prominent murid who was with the Sheikh for quite a long time and living in his tekke in Cyprus. Our second stop was Sheffield, where there was a substantial number of the Sheikh's followers. I spent the night in the house of a very friendly English murid who I had known from London. Again, I was with my travelling companions and some other murids, since the house of our host, who lived with his wife and 2 sons, was large enough to accommodate all of us. The next morning, the plan was to move to Newcastle after the noon prayer. However, there was an unexpected development, and instead we went to a prehistoric site in the countryside, Arbor Low, near Bakewell, Derbyshire. There we performed a zikr led by the Sheikh to frighten the devil worshippers, apparently, who used the place regularly for their ceremonies. It was evening before we were on our way to Newcastle. In Newcastle, we stayed at the same house as the Sheikh, that of a wealthy Indo-Pakistani family. Next day after lunch, I explained to the Sheikh that I had to go back. He said that he had brought me on this journey because I was studying his community, and therefore he had wanted me to see it on a wider basis. I expressed my thanks to him and mentioned that my wife was ill and in a difficult situation without my money. In the end, he agreed and gave me permission to go, but wondered how I was going to get back. I said I could get the train from Newcastle. He did not say anything. However, just before leaving Newcastle for Scotland, he called someone from a group of South Asian Murids who had come from Woking to visit him, and were now going back. I told him something, pointing at, and told him something, sorry, the Sheikh told him something, pointing at me. Then he called me to his side and said that they were going to take me home. I was extremely astonished at the Sheikh's courtesy. I expressed my gratefulness to him and kissed his hand. After the Sheikh left, my fellow passengers had a comfortable lunch in the host's house. Later, we left Newcastle. However, the plan turned out different from what I expected. We were first going back to Sheffield to join the subgroup of the Indo-Pakistani Murids led by Sheikh Youssef, the Egyptian Sayyid, in their place of gathering, which was a big house. This was a big surprise for me, but because they said it would it would take just a couple of hours and then we would leave for London. I thought it would be a good opportunity to learn more about this subgroup. It was so indeed, but the plan for going to London did not work. Sheikh Youssef was very busy. We had to wait to see him. In the end, we passed all night at the house with around 50 other Marids. We chatted on several topics, and it was nearly morning before we left for London. Thus, I had an extra night which was really exceptional in that I had it within the relatively isolated world of a faction of Shaykh Nazim's Naqshbandi community in Sheffield. In these cities, the Sheikh gave many talks to the audiences in private houses, mosques, and communal halls, led the prayers, and at the proper times the zikr ceremonies. He listened to numerous people and gave them advice according to their needs. We stopped along the motorway at petrol stations to perform the daily prayers. The opportunity was fascinating in that it was quite a different picture of Islamic practice from the one that we are accustomed to seeing, i.e., the threatening face of radical political Islam. Here was a lively and harmless Muslim community with its national and ethnic multiplicity led by a cheerful old man enjoying their lives in the green British countryside. My relations with the Sheikh reached a peak in the days following his return to London. I was no longer struggling to create opportunities to go to the places where the Sheikh was, as I had done earlier in the period of my fieldwork. Instead, the Sheikh himself started to take me to the houses which he was invited to dinner. On these occasions, he talked about topics related to my interests or to those he had wanted me to hear. I was able to be present in some meetings where even those murids with the skill and zeal to attend every occasion were absent. This continued until the Sheikh left London at the end of his third month there. He was given an emotional send-off by the murids in Dover and left for France. So I think I will leave it there, and I will continue this next week. Basically, I'm just reading the part uh, which is where Professor Tayfun Atay is discussing his interactions with the community and his experiences, because it's a perspective from outside the faith community. It's a perspective from outside the Sufi community. Professor Tayfun, he's Muslim, but he's not particularly practicing. He's very secular, or he was when he wrote this. I don't know now. I mean, Allah knows best. But because of the perspective that he has, it gives a unique picture, an insight into Sheikh Nazim's community at that time. And also, as you can see from the way he recorded this journey, he recorded it meticulously. And that gives a perspective of how Maulana Sheikh Nazim was living his life in the UK. And I think there's a wisdom here on Sheikh Nazim's part, because he knew that Professor Typhon, doing an academic study, that he would record this impartially and fairly and in some detail. And it's interesting that comment that Professor Typhon mentions here, where he says, the opportunity was fascinating in that it was a quite different picture of Islamic practice from the one we are accustomed to seeing, the threatening face of radical political Islam. Here was a lively and harmless Muslim community with its national and ethnic multiplicity, led by a cheerful old man enjoying their lives in the green British countryside. And if anybody wonders what drew me to this tariqah, there's an insight. It's not the only thing, but there's an insight there. The diversity within the community, the fact that the community is based, yes, upon the spiritual teachings within the Quran and in the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, but it is in a very friendly and open way, in a way that's welcoming, in a way that's inclusive and supportive. And surely this must have been how the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him's community was back in his time. Otherwise, who would have joined it? Who's going to join something that they don't feel comfortable with? Anyway, I hope you are enjoying this, and I will continue again next week. Uh, I hope you all have a wonderful evening and an amazing weekend. Uh, Salam alaikum, Lain. How are you? I hope you're well. So until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. May the peace and blessings of God be with you all.